Okay.
Hey.
Welcome to D Slavery. This is Frenchie Davis, and I am so excited to be live with Reverend Lacette Cross, Rev L.
What's happening? How you doing today?
I am great, and at the same time, maybe concerned with some of the things that are going. But I'm always concerned but not surprised by you know what's happening in our religious community, particularly the Black religious community, particularly the Christian faith. And as we are members of the Incarnation Institute for Sex and Faith, I know that we can always create a safe space to have these very important dialogues about what is happening between Black sexuality, religion, and we're going to add, even into that intersection, politics today.
Yeah. Yes.
And so when I saw the headlines about this very important Senate race in Atlanta, Georgia, with Reverend Warnock, who is running for the Senate office, and the other preachers and pastors in this Black community are urging Reverend Warnock to change his position on reproductive rights, particularly abortion rights for women. And I'm frustrated. I'm trying to use my kind words. I am frustrated that only 11% of Christian churches are led by women. Very small number, considering that women make up 75% of the congregation. And when I listen to men who claim to be under the cloak of God discuss the controlling over women's reproductive rights when too many of them cannot control their own penises, I have major concerns.
Okay.
So welcome everybody to D Slavery. D Slavery means speak the truth in French. I am Frenchie Davis with Reverend Lacette Cross. Will you be whole? Will you be whole? And feel free to make your comments, but we are going to have a brief dialogue about this today. So I'm excited to be with you.
I'm excited to be here too, and I have to let you know that had you not sent me the text, and for the people watching, Frenchie is on it, because had you not sent me the text with the link to it, I would have been none the wiser, right? And so I'm glad we can have a conversation. I'm glad that we can name some of the irony in all of this, right? The fact that you have a Black male pastor of a traditional Black Baptist church in the Deep South, the Church of Martin Luther King, right? That he pastors, the historic Ebenezer, to state very clearly that he is a pro-choice pastor, right? So then that somehow galvanizes this other group of Black ministers to try to silence him, right? So it is this like the audacity of patriarchy to try to silence another person, the audacity of like theological arrogance to think that their interpretation of the text, their interpretation of what it means to live according to a justice-centered faith that says that God created all bodies and that each person has a responsibility to control their bodies, right? That this is really I'm not going to call it a watershed moment because it's not that, but it is amplified, right? In this moment of being able to say, what does it mean when a group of Black men try to censor another Black man who's in support of women's bodily autonomy?
It says we got a real problem, and I say you need to send your tithing someplace else. That's what it says.
That is what it says, right? and it pushes us to really think about that. It pushes us to think about the power of public witness to really push back on those who feel like their conservative theological views need to be the predominant views, and they don't care who is harmed in the process, right? So I just also need to name, and I think you know this already, Frenchie, is that this is also a reproductive justice issue.
Absolutely.
Right? And reproductive justice as a framework centers the decision for people to have children, right? Or to not have children, and then to raise said children, right, in safe environments. So here we are recognizing that the church, once again, one subset of the church is trying to tell another subset, you need to believe like we believe, even at the expense of the, to your point, 75% of their membership choices around their bodies and whether or not they want to engage in a in a safe, healthy medical procedure that is abortion.
Right, but and how can women find safety and security in their faith
Yeah.
when the men that are supposed to be their partners, their supporters are virtually against their own personal autonomy? So how are Black women particularly safe in a church that men that these particular religious leaders, I'm not going to say all the men in the church, but these particular religious leaders are against their personal rights? Now, have your beliefs. How about don't participate, don't engage, don't put yourself in a position to have some type of extramarital affair that results in pregnancy, so that there could potentially be the question about abortion. That's how you take ownership of your body and do the right thing. But I'm laughing because while we're also in the cross of social media, and recently there in the headlines, there have been numerous reports about celebrity pastors getting caught out in the wind, while being hypocritical to their congregation, and then at the same time trying to rule over the domain of women's bodies. How do women find safety in that?
I mean, I think women have to do what women have been doing for millennia, which is create spaces of their own. I mean, this is not, huh?
I said, like you have, will you be whole?
Like, right. That Will You Be Whole helps to fill a gap where I talk about sex and faith with Black women and LGBTQ folks. And I do think that part of this moment is also this realization that women can make decisions to not only create spaces where there is safety, but also decisions to hold said ministers accountable, right? Because the thing about people who believe that they're right, they don't have no problems putting their names out there, right? So even in that story, you saw the letter, and on that letter was the list of all of the pastors. And oh, by the way, it was pastors from across the country, not just from Georgia, right? Yeah. So we're talking about a national, widespread dis-ease that is patriarchy, that is, like I said earlier, theological arrogance. And so I believe, women identified folks, I think men who believe that women know what we need about our bodies, can create spaces of dialogue such as this, can create spaces of fellowship and community when we can go back outside and be with each other, right? Where we can be honest about our experiences. And I think that is going to always be the answer, right? The counter to these kind of harmful dynamics that this story kind of highlights, right? Where this group of Black ministers urge this one person who is honest about his positioning. And so then that makes me think about all of the other Black male ministers who affirm abortion, who affirm pro-choice, who affirm reproductive justice for women and women's bodily autonomy. to also stand up, because there is probably a greater number that believe just like Reverend Warnock does believe, who have just been in the cut, right? And what do we do about that? How do we make them more visible to everybody else? I think that that is um, I think that that's important to also acknowledge in this moment, right? Because there are other Black male pastors who are justice oriented, who are women centered, who are all about women being who they are and making the choices about their bodies. And so, how do we also make it, I don't want to use the word safe, but definitely make it beneficial, right? To stand up for women and to stand with women around the choices we make about our bodies.
Absolutely. And, I always, as you refer to it as theological arrogance, which is also true, I also like to point out the Christian misogyny that exists in the church, because as much as we talk about misogyny in music and in television, it is very much grounded in religion today. And so we
Yes.
need to have more conversations around Christian misogyny. But something that you said that pointed out to me is that I think is important, though, when we are approaching our spiritual guides, leaders, what do you think are some of the approaches that we can take? What could that possibly look like? Because I think it is very difficult when you are seeking spiritual guidance for someone to tell them that, their viewpoint is harming their bodily autonomy. And this doesn't have to do with just, someone. I think a lot of people think that sometimes abortion happens to people who are sexually irresponsible, and this is their fault. And so we should just say no. Never leave it out that there are medical occurrences that occur with women. There are medical issues with many women's bodies. She could be at a certain age. There are a multitude of reasons why this particular um, opportunity exists as far as abortion rights. And even the body, when the body is having a miscarriage, it is the body also saying that something is not right with this pregnancy and it has to eliminate the pregnancy. So even God has made an exceptional way, if there weren't other tools, for the body to do what it needs. And sometimes when the body cannot do that, you have to make medical decisions. And they're not easy medical decisions. So I need to know, Pastor, why are you in my vulva?
Why are you?
What's going on with that?
Right. Your question is so loaded and layered, right? Because when you initially start out and you talk about spiritual guidance, right? Or when people seek a pastor or people seek a religious leader, right? They often are doing it from a place of not necessarily their body, but from their heart, their soul, the essence of who they are, and wanting to be able to say, can you help me connect to a higher power, be in community with others, right? And learn and grow spiritually. And most oftentimes we don't bring our bodies into it until we are forced to have to make some difficult decisions. And I think the reason why abortion is such a stigmatized issue and such a major issue for the church is because of a positioning about life, right? A
Sure,
positioning around when when the sperm meets the egg, a life is produced, right?
sure.
And the choices and the decisions around that really do reside in the body of the individual that has to carry said life, right? So I do appreciate like you pushing us to think about, when I go and find a spiritual space, I'm really looking for my soul and my heart to be supported. And it is not until I'm forced to make some difficult decisions that the role of that person becomes as more prominent, right? So then that makes us think about, socially speaking, we put some, society places a heavy burden on pastors. And then those pastors, right, and ministers and other religious leaders feel like they have a responsibility to somehow speak for God, right? To be God's spokesperson. So then, therefore, they take some liberties in what they believe they think that God would say, right? And that is why I think that when we talk about this issue about Black ministers intervening with our vulvas, right, making decisions or assessment about how we make choices about our bodies, it is also having to say, you don't get to talk to God on my behalf. You don't get to make the decision about something deeply personal and truly internal to my embodiment and to my personhood. You get to say, here are some guidelines. I get to shepherd you. That's what pastoring means, ushering you along, but you don't get to make the decision for me, right? So then the responsibility and the accountability has to come in saying to ministers, to pastors, where are you then leaning into allowing that person to make the decision for themselves and praying with them, praying for them, not deciding for them, and not shaming them into decisions that are not yours to make?
And even more so, it's even more impacting when you decide to negate political strategy over women's bodies. Never recalling how many women or girls have died trying to not use medical services for abortions. I mean, have they really forgotten that there was an entire era when women were using hangers?
Yeah.
Have they forgot about, if you are pro-life and it means so much to you, then what you don't do is try to collectively legislate over somebody else's medical and sexual autonomy. If it really means that much to you, that is overstepping. That is not in any way godly. And in fact, again, it's just another form of misogyny, particularly when you have no medical background, particularly when you have no sex education background to make these decisions with someone else. If you are not a certified marriage counselor, we should not be seeing you about our marriage. If you are not an OBGYN, you should have no input whatsoever on my reproductive birthrights.
I think the point I want to make as somebody who is a pastor and as somebody who is a woman is to be able to say, pastors, ordained ministers, individuals need to know how to refer out. Every professional needs to know how to refer out. And when it comes to deep personal bodily decisions that are about life and death, that needs to be referred out, because when the doctors, the OBGYNs, the sex educators, the professionals that are trained in that arena really provide the data and information for that person to make that decision, then the role of the minister and the pastor, the spiritual leader, is to just say, how are you doing? How are you navigating it? How is your soul? How do you feel connected? How do I support what's happening, right? That we see is a slippery slope, right, into controlling people, right? And that is an unfortunate mark of the institutional church at large, that the church likes to set out edicts that control people's decisions, their mindsets, their thinking, and then therefore trying to control people's bodies, because it is easier to try to control people than it is to live in the mystery that is our individual choice, because our individual choices really do intersect with one another, right? And we do have to leave it up to God, or we do have to leave it up to how our collective voices rise to the top. So it is layered and nuanced and extremely messy, right? And we cannot escape the impact of systems of oppression like misogyny, like patriarchy. And oh, let us not forget, right? The women who are out here who have internalized patriarchy,
Absolutely.
right? Who are willing to listen to the male pastors and ministers talk in controlling ways about their bodies, and those individuals, those women then go and train up their daughters and talk to other women and then shame other women, right? Because the role of internalized patriarchy that comes out in how women build relationships and interact in community with each other is also a real thing, right? Because abortion is such, once again, I keep saying it, abortion is such a stigmatized issue. And let us not, this is my last thing I'm going to say, Frenchie, because I know you got another question. And let us not miss the importance of this being Black church, right? The importance of Black women who saved our democracy in November. It is about Black women who, at the end of the day, keep on saving us, and people want to continually control our bodies, continually put in place mindsets, ideas, and even policies to try to prohibit us from making our own decisions around what we believe God and our relationship with God is guiding us to do, and what is healthy for our own bodies.
And thank you for that. And it's for those women who have, and girls who have had to be on the other side of making this tremendous decision. It's not for any of us to decide what is, so to speak, wrong or right. And the problem is we keep trying to live in the wrongs and rights when there is so much in between a wrong and a right. And we're not acknowledging what's in between the wrong and the right. But let me tell you, as Black women have, birthed a new presidency, thank God. And this is the thanks that you show women. This is how you honor the women who showed up, who are working to change this world around, who are working on COVID vaccines, who are working to be doulas, working to be mothers. This is the thanks that our spiritual leaders show women by trying to convince Reverend Warnock to change his stance on allowing women to make their own decisions about their bodies. This is what we get in return. This is harm. And if we do not call out our spiritual leaders for doing the almost irreversible harm that they continue to perpetuate, we'll continue to go down this rabbit hole. And I have a great fear of that, because as a sex educator, the biggest hang up that our clients have are because of the Christian misogyny that they've experienced through their entire life. And I've said this before, everybody knows the fast girl in church, but nobody knows the girl that was molested and violated.
Yes. I just want to be able to, I fully agree with you. And I do think that we would be remiss in this moment to not bring in the power of our voice and our vote in changing policies, because the rhetoric of the pulpit goes all the way to the ballot box.
All the way.
The rhetoric of the pulpit goes all the way to the ballot box. And when we get to the ballot box, we are putting people in places of power that then that introduce and vote on legislation that end up impacting our daily lives. And so to understand these layered connections, it is, yes, about the personal decisions of individuals. And those individuals live within a state and federal system that says, as democratic as we are we're supposed to be, that says we can then vote on the types of policies and legislation that will govern us and how we live and how systems are to operate, right? So to see the thread of what you're laying out in the argument, Frenchie, is also dangerous, because we may begin with a matter of these Black ministers urging a pro-choice pastor to retract his statement, that leads all the way to a possibility of having the United States Senate be in Democratic control. And then we have the opportunity, right, to actually pass the Each Woman Act that does put in place federal protections for women to make decisions, right, about their bodily autonomy. People cannot miss this kind of connecting of the dots that is impacted and influenced by misogyny, by patriarchy, by ignorance, right? And then the term that I used earlier, as we started this conversation, Frenchie, was theological arrogance, right? And when I say that term, I'm talking about the arrogance of individuals to say that they have the 100% understanding of who God is and how God operates. That to have enough audacity to believe that however much reading and learning you have, that you have the correct interpretation of the Bible, that you have the correct interpretation of who God is and how God is moving and speaking with us now, right? And that is arrogance at the end of the day.
Not only that, but that you have the correct interpretation to determine what's going on with someone else's body.
Yes.
Now, I don't know.
Right.
None of these pastors have attended any gynecological appointment with me ever.
No, they don't know you. They don't know me. They don't know the thousands and millions of women out here who have to make those decisions, right? And who have to care for our own bodies. But what they think they know is how God is. What they think they know is what God approves of, what God says is right and good. And because they think they know that, that is translated in their rhetoric, right? That then fuels their confidence in the language that they said to Raphael Warnock, Reverend Warnock, in that letter, that you can be about justice, but you can't be about women making choices for their bodies. You everything else you said was fine, but where you cross the line, where you are not in line with what God has said in God's word, is being a pro-choice pastor. And now we are calling upon you to retract that. That's where the theological arrogance comes in, right? And we have to kind of keep acknowledging that that is about people thinking that they know the mind of God, and that can't be true. I just don't believe it's true, especially like you said, when it's my body.
Right. And particularly because we have such individualistic relationships with God, however we see her or him.
Yes.
We have, that is a very, individualized, this is not a one size fits all plan here.
Yes.
There's no way that when you're speaking to your congregation that you're speaking to every single person.
Right.
There are certain people that are going to be able to take away certain messages, but the message that you are conveying right now, the message that these pastors are conveying right now is that they have absolutely no regard for the sexual autonomy, individuality, medical circumstances of the women that make up 75% of their congregation.
Yeah.
75%.
Right.
And that is shameful. Yeah. That is really, really shameful. And not to be judgmental, because I do believe that people operate a lot of times from a space of fear. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of this is around fear of respectability, fear of, making this a stronger community. Like, I get that, but I need you to come from an informed space. And since you are not informed on these women's bodies, you do not get to make these types of sweeping statements, judgments, legislative chokeholds on Reverend Warnock to suit your personal needs and religious arrogance, as you put it.
Yeah. Listen, you said it. I just don't think that it's going to ever stop, though, right? And to me, the remedy to it, the pushback to it, is to elevate the voices of men and women and trans and non-binary folks that say, you don't get to tell me who God is. You don't get to inform me or shepherd me into what it means to make decisions for my body, right? And you don't get to tell me who to vote for that represents the majority of how I, how I want my country or the laws of my country or my state or my city, whatever, to be. And so then that begs the question, how do we begin to create liberating communities where our choices matter, where we are grounded in values that are supportive of one another to fight against systems, right? Oppressive systems that always know how to they know how to manipulate themselves, right? They change and they mutate to always get right beyond our grasp, or right when we think we free, something changes up, right? And so I think that we do have to realize that the power is within us as individuals to say, this is who my God is, these are who my medical professionals are, this is who my community of support is, this is how we're going to pray about this or discern about this or sit quiet in meditation about this, because at the end of the day, this really does come down to an individual person's choice or who they are in relationship with as it relates to this, right? But we cannot escape the truth that the personal is political. Yeah. And that is where this conversation sparks people to really think about, why does this matter? Why does politics and religion want to have this role in it? While we're trying to figure that out, also offering what are some ways that we can move forward in positive, right? And liberating way, because I'm always about liberation and wholeness, right?
Absolutely. And this is why I know I can begin these conversations with you and hopefully give our viewers and our listeners food for thought. And as we wrap up this conversation, because I'm not going to hold people, but January 6th is an important day, and I hope that the wind blows in Warnock's way with this video. There's enough social media to be shared, but maintain your stance for the sanctity of congregations across the United States. And again, no religious leader has the right to be in someone's reproductive autonomy. Yeah. Not men or women. Unless you are doctor, physician, doctor, OB/GYN, doctor, reverend, preacher, so-and-so. God said, shut up. Okay. I had a sanctified tongue and God said, shut up. Okay. And so I just want to make people aware, and particularly women aware, that this conversation, this dialogue, this pressure is happening, and it will impact us. Yes. So I want you all to be informed. And Reverend, I think I know we're going to come back and have these dialogues again.
We're going to keep having them.
For sitting with me and having this dialogue. Please let our viewers know where they can find you, please.
Yes. Well, they can find me at willyouBeWhole.com. Instagram is Reverend L Sex and Faith, and on Facebook it's Will You Be Whole with Reverend L. Also got to shout out the Incarnation Institute for Sex and Faith that does all kinds of trainings for pastors and theologians and sexologists, wanting to make sure that we lift that up as 2 board members. But they can find me there, and we'll continue this conversation because it is so layered and nuanced. And thank you to Michelle and Lafayette and Reverend Dr. Beverly Dale, who was put in some comments, and other folks who have just been really on here sharing this. There was another person who did an awesome Beverly Sarton, you
Yeah.
know. So I just think, yeah, I just want to shout those folks out because it is great to be able to have this conversation between you and I and the broader community that spans this country. Thank you so much, Frenchie Davis.
Thank you. I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy
Ciao.
holidays.